Abraham's story begins more than 4,000 years ago, in a place that historians and archaeologists still call one of the cradles of civilization, the city of in Mesopotamia. Imagine the bustling streets, merchants trading wool and copper, scribes pressing cuneiform letters into clay tablets, priests raising incense before massive ziggurats that towered like mountains over the plain. This was no small outpost. Was a powerful, wealthy city, and it was here that a man named Abram was born.
Across time, voices have whispered through history, echoes of faith, myth, and mystery. From ancient temples to sacred texts, from forgotten rituals to living traditions, humanity has always searched for meaning beyond the veil of the ordinary. Here at Scared Echoes, we bring those voices back to life, exploring the stories, symbols, and secrets that shaped civilizations and still shape us today. Step into the echoes of the past. And if you seek deeper knowledge, like, share, and subscribe to join the journey.
Now, according to the biblical timeline, only a few generations had passed since the Great Flood of Noah. Some traditions even say that Abram's great-great-grandfather would have been alive during Abram's childhood, meaning the memory of that flood and of Noah's God was still alive, still whispered about in families. But, despite this, was a city steeped in idolatry. The moon god Nana ruled the skyline, and people bowed before carved stone and golden idols. And Abram's own family, including his father Terah, were among those who worshipped these gods.
It's important to pause here, because this is where Abram's life takes its first traumatic turn. One day, in the middle of this culture of idols, Abram heard something that shattered his ordinary world. The God of Noah, the one true creator, spoke directly to him. And what he said was almost impossible to believe. Leave your homeland, leave your father's house, go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. And through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed.
Think about that. Abram wasn't a king. He wasn't a conqueror. He didn't have an army. He was just one man in a city full of idols. Yet here was a divine voice promising him land, descendants, and a role so vast it would stretch far beyond his imagination. It was, in human terms, absurd. But Abram believed. He trusted that if the living God was speaking, then he could obey. And so he began preparing for a journey that would change the entire course of history.
With his wife Sarai by his side and his nephew Lot traveling along, Abram gathered his belongings, his flocks, and his servants. Following the ancient trade routes, they moved northwest along the Fertile Crescent until they settled for a time in Haran, a city named after one of Abram's brothers. Here they paused for years. It wasn't until Abram was 75 years old, after his father Terah had died, that God's call came again, sharper and more urgent. Leave, go, trust. And so, this man who had grown old without children, this man who owned no kingdom and commanded no army, stepped out into the unknown. By faith, Abram left Haran behind, and with Sarai and Lot, he turned his eyes south toward a land promised but not yet revealed.
The caravan moved steadily south, past rolling hills and into the rugged land of Canaan. This was no paradise at first glance. The Canaanites who lived here had their own powerful cities, fortified walls, and gods who demanded shocking forms of worship. Archaeologists have uncovered altars from this very region, massive stone platforms where children were sacrificed to appease bloodthirsty deities. Abram must have looked at these strange rituals and felt a shiver of unease.
Yet God told him that this land would one day belong to his descendants. Standing near Shechem, Abram built his first altar to the Lord, a bold declaration that this land, claimed by idols, would one day be claimed by the one true God. But almost immediately, the promise was tested. Famine swept across the land, drying up the soil and withering crops. Abram had no choice but to lead his family further south, into the lush fields of Egypt.
It should have been a safe refuge, but fear gripped him. Sarai, his wife, was strikingly beautiful, and Abram worried that the Egyptians might kill him just to take her. So he whispered to her, "Tell them you're my sister." It was a half-truth, but a dangerous one.
When Pharaoh's officials saw Sarai, their eyes lit up, and she was taken into Pharaoh's household. Abram, meanwhile, was treated generously, showered with sheep, cattle, and servants. But the deception couldn't last. Plagues struck Pharaoh's household, a divine warning that something was terribly wrong. Furious, Pharaoh confronted Abram, demanding why he hadn't told the truth. He returned Sarai untouched and expelled Abram and his entire household from Egypt. It was a shameful moment, a reminder that even a man of faith could stumble when fear outweighed trust.
Back in Canaan, Abram tried to restore peace. But another problem soon erupted. Both his herds and Lot's herds had grown so vast that the land could not support them together. Arguments broke out among their herdsmen. Instead of letting the conflict fester, Abram chose humility. Standing with Lot, he said, "Let there be no strife between us. Look around. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left."
Lot's eyes scanned the land and fixed it on the lush plain of the Jordan, watered like a garden, dotted with wealthy cities like Sodom and Gomorrah. Without hesitation, Lot chose what looked good to the eye. Abram, by contrast, remained in the hills of Canaan, pitching his tents near Hebron and building another altar to the Lord.
To outsiders, it may have looked like Lot had made the better choice. Rich pastures, thriving cities, endless opportunities. But soon, the moral rot of Sodom would make itself clear, and Abram's quiet faith, rooted in God's promises, would be shown to be far stronger than Lot's quick grasp at luxury. Not long after Lot settled near Sodom, a storm of violence swept across the region. 4 powerful kings from the east marched westward, conquering cities one by one, demanding tribute and loyalty. The kings of the Jordan Plain, including Sodom's king, resisted, but they were crushed in battle. The victors plundered the cities, seized their wealth, and carried off captives. Among those taken was Lot, Abram's nephew.
When word reached Abram, he acted without hesitation. Though he was no king and commanded no standing army, Abram gathered 318 trained men from his household, along with allies from nearby clans. Under the cover of night, they pursued the invaders north as far as Dan, then launched a surprise attack. It was daring, almost reckless, but it worked. The enemy was routed, Lot was rescued, and the stolen goods were recovered.
As Abram returned triumphant, 2 figures came out to meet him in the valley of Sheva. The first was the king of Sodom, eager to reclaim his people and treasures. But the second was someone far more mysterious, Melchizedek, the king of Salem. His name meant King of Righteousness, and he was not only a ruler, but also a priest of God Most High.
Melchizedek brought out bread and wine and blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Abram, recognizing the sacredness of the moment, gave Melchizedek 1/10 of all he had.
This brief encounter would echo through centuries of tradition. Who was Melchizedek? Some saw him as a symbol of Christ, a priest without beginning or end, bridging heaven and earth. Others saw him as a reminder that God's presence was not confined to Abram alone, that even in a world full of idols, there were still pockets of true worship.
Then came the king of Sodom, offering Abram the spoils of war. "Give me the people, but take the goods for yourself." But Abram refused. He lifted his hand and swore, "I will not accept even a thread or a sandal strap from you, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich.'"
In that moment, Abram showed something vital about his character. He did not depend on kings or wealth for his future. His trust was in God alone. The battle had been fierce, the temptation strong, But Abram walked away with his integrity intact, leaving the valley not just as a victor in war, but as a man whose faith had been tested and proven once again.
Though victories had been won and altars built, Abram still carried a quiet ache in his heart. Years had passed since he first heard God's promise, yet he and Sarai remained childless. In the ancient world, to have no heir was a shadow over a man's life, a future cut off before it began. And so Abram prayed honestly, "O Lord God, what can you give me? I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar of Damascus."
But God's reply was astonishing. He brought Abram outside beneath the night sky and said, "Look toward heaven and count the stars if you are able. So shall your descendants be." Abram looked up, his eyes sweeping across thousands of glittering lights, and in that moment, he believed. The scriptures say that his faith was counted to him as righteousness. God then sealed his promise with a covenant, a ritual both solemn and mysterious. Abram prepared animals, cutting them in two, arranging the halves opposite each other, an ancient custom symbolizing that the covenant maker would suffer the same fate if he broke his word.
As night fell, a deep sleep came over Abram, and a dread filled him. Then, in the darkness, he saw a smoking fire pot and a blazing torch pass between the pieces. This was no dream. It was God himself declaring, "To your descendants I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates." Yet time kept moving, and the promise remained unfulfilled. Sarai, weary of waiting, proposed a solution. She offered her Egyptian maid, Hagar, to Abram as a surrogate. It was a common practice in their culture, but it was not God's plan. Abram agreed, and Hagar conceived. But instead of peace, strife entered their household. Sarai grew jealous, Hagar grew prideful, and soon Hagar fled into the wilderness.
There, an angel of the Lord found her beside a spring and spoke words of both comfort and prophecy. "You will give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your affliction." Hagar returned, and Ishmael was born, Abram's son, but not the child of promise.
Abraham bowed low, but when God declared that Sarah herself would bear a son, he laughed. Could it be? At such an age, was it even possible? Yet God's answer was firm. "Yes, Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac."
In that moment, the long years of waiting and doubt collided with a renewed hope. The promise was not forgotten, the covenant was alive, and the impossible was about to unfold. As the covenant deepened, Abraham's journey entered its most dramatic and testing chapters. One hot afternoon, while sitting at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw three mysterious visitors standing nearby. Without hesitation, he rushed to offer them water, bread, and a place of rest, the sacred duty of hospitality. These were no ordinary travelers.
They spoke with the voice of God himself. One declared that within a year, Sarah would bear a son. From inside the tent, Sarah overheard and laughed to herself. The thought of cradling a newborn at 90 was absurd, but God's voice cut through her doubt. Is anything too hard for the Lord?
After the visitors departed, God revealed another mission to Abraham. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, infamous for their corruption and violence, were marked for judgment. Yet Abraham, with a heart of compassion, pleaded with God, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous, or 40, or even 10? God promised that for the sake of 10, the cities would be spared. But there were not 10.
Only Lot and his family were warned to flee. As dawn broke, Fire and brimstone rained down, and the smoke of the cities rose like a great furnace. Abraham, standing on the hillside, looked out and saw the aftermath, a grim reminder of justice and of mercy lost.
Then, against all odds, the promise finally came to life. Sarah conceived, and in her old age bore a son. They named him Isaac, meaning laughter. For Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and all who hear will laugh with me." The child of promise had arrived, and with him the fulfillment of God's word. Yet this joy was soon followed by the greatest test Abraham would ever face.
Years later, God called to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. There, offer him as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." The words cut deeper than any sword. Abraham rose early, saddled his donkey, and took Isaac along with wood for the sacrifice.
For 3 days they journeyed. At last, Isaac, carrying the wood on his back, turned and asked, "Father, where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" Abraham's reply was steady. "God himself will provide the lamb." On the mountain, Abraham built the altar, arranged the wood, and bound Isaac upon it. With a trembling hand, he lifted the knife, but at that moment a voice from heaven cried out, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Lifting his eyes, Abraham saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. He offered it in Isaac's place.
The mountain was named "The Lord Will Provide," and the covenant was confirmed with greater power than ever before. Abraham's descendants would be as countless as the stars, and through them all nations of the earth would be blessed.
Sarah lived to the age of 127. When she died at Hebron, Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah as a burial site, the first permanent piece of land he owned in the Promised Land. Later, when Abraham himself reached the fullness of years, he too was laid to rest beside her.
But his story did not end in the grave. His faith, his covenant, his journey became the foundation of nations and religions alike. Jews traced their heritage to him through Isaac and Jacob. Christians see in his faith a foreshadowing of their own salvation. Muslims honor him as a prophet and father of Ishmael. Across the world, billions look back to this wandering man from Ur, who heard a voice, trusted a promise, and followed it to the end. The stars he once counted still shine above us, countless, eternal, unbroken, a reminder that the covenant of faith still echoes across the ages.